I want to begin by being very precise about my own title, because the dollar cannot survive what is already in motion is a phrase that sounds deterministic, and determinism about the future is exactly the register I try to avoid because it almost always overclaims, and I do not want to overclaim. So let me say carefully what this does and does not mean. It does not mean that the dollar's collapse is sealed or imminent or that some catastrophe is now inevitable. I do not believe that, and I have been careful across all my thinking to distinguish the claim that the dollar's dominance is under genuine long-term pressure from the claim that it faces imminent collapse, and I hold the first and reject the second. What I mean by cannot survive what is already in motion is something narrower and more defensible, and it is this. The erosion of the dollar's exorbitant privilege, its specific and extraordinary set of advantages, is being driven by forces that are already set in motion, that are self-reinforcing, and that have passed the point where any single decision could reverse them. And what is sealed, what cannot survive, is not the dollar, and not even the dollar's continued use, but the specific privilege. And what is sealed about it is the direction, not the timing and not the form. The direction is locked in by momentum. The timing remains genuinely uncertain, and the form will be gradual rather than catastrophic. That distinction between a sealed direction and an open timing is the whole of what I want to develop, because I think it is one of the most important and least understood distinctions in all of thinking about the future. Let me be careful, as always, about the two extremes, because this is a subject that pulls people hard toward one of them and both are wrong. The first extreme is the doom narrative, the deterministic prophecy of imminent collapse, the reading of already in motion as meaning the catastrophe is upon us and the timing is short and the form is dramatic. That is not my claim, and it is not what the momentum actually implies, because momentum determines direction, not timing. And reading a sealed direction as an imminent collapse is precisely the overclaiming I want to avoid. And the second extreme is the comfortable dismissal, the belief that the outcome is still entirely open, that whatever pressures exist can be reversed by a future decision, that if only the right reforms were made, the privilege would be restored and the erosion undone. This is the more common error, and it is the more dangerous one, because it mistakes a process already running under its own momentum for a problem still awaiting a decision, and that misclassification, as I will argue, is what keeps people from responding to a direction that is in fact already sealed. The truth is neither imminent doom nor an open future awaiting rescue. The truth is that the direction is determined by forces already in motion, that only the timing is still open, and that the intelligent response to a sealed direction with an uncertain timing is neither panic nor complacency, but calm, early, deliberate preparation. So let me begin with the distinction that everything depends on, the distinction between a process that is still open and a process that is already in motion. Some outcomes in the world genuinely still depend on decisions that have not yet been made, on choices that remain open, on futures that could still go one way or another depending on what people decide. And other outcomes are already determined, not by any single decision, but by forces that have been set in motion and that now have their own momentum, that run under their own power regardless of what anyone decides next. And the crucial skill, the genuinely difficult and genuinely important skill, is distinguishing which is which, because you respond completely differently to the two. To an outcome that is still open, the rational response is to wait, to work for the good decision, to hope that the choice goes the right way, because the outcome still depends on the choice. But to an outcome that is already determined by momentum, waiting and hoping is a catastrophic error, because no decision will reverse it, and the only rational response is to reposition now, to prepare for the determined outcome, because the direction is set and only the timing remains. And the failure that ruins people again and again is the misclassification, the treatment of a determined process as though it were still open, the waiting and hoping for a reversal that the momentum has already foreclosed. I want to develop what self-reinforcing momentum actually is, because it is the mechanism by which a process passes from open to determined. And understanding It is understanding why some things become irreversible. A self-reinforcing process is a feedback loop in which each step makes the next step more likely and less costly, so that the process, once it begins, tends to accelerate rather than to fade. And such a loop has a threshold, a point of no return, and it is worth being precise about what happens at that threshold. Before the threshold, the process still requires pushing, still depends on continued effort to sustain it, and could still be stopped by removing the push. But past the threshold, the process no longer needs to be pushed because it runs on its own momentum, each step generating the energy for the next. And at that point, stopping it would require not merely removing the push, but actively overcoming the momentum, which is a far harder thing, usually far harder than anyone is willing or able to do. This is why the threshold matters so much. Before it, the outcome is still open, still reversible by stopping the push. After it, the outcome is determined because reversing it would require overcoming a momentum that has become self-sustaining, and that overcoming is almost never achieved, particularly when it would require politically difficult and coordinated action that the incentive structures do not permit. The principles that determine how to distinguish what is still open from what is already determined, how to read the momentum of a structural process rather than comfortably assuming the future remains open to rescue, are worth studying deliberately and as a connected whole. And there is a body of work that lays them out carefully called the Naval Codex. It is not a forecast, and it is not a set of tactics. It is a systematic account of the underlying principles that determine who preserves and builds genuine wealth by reading structural reality accurately, including the reality of which processes are still open and which are already in motion. If you want to engage with those principles directly, it is linked in the description, and there is a code on the screen you can scan to reach it. And engaging with the principles directly is what matters, because the skill of distinguishing the open from the determined generalizes far beyond any single situation, and the situations it applies to will always be changing. So let me apply this to the dollar, and let me describe the specific self-reinforcing loops that are, I believe, already in motion, because the abstract point about momentum only becomes useful when you can see the concrete loops that are actually running. The first loop is the de-dollarization loop, and it is genuinely self-reinforcing in a way that is worth tracing carefully. The dollar's dominance rests partly on the fact that most global transactions flow through infrastructure controlled by or subject to American jurisdiction, and this creates a form of leverage, the ability to exclude actors by denying them access. But every exercise of that leverage, every use of the dollar system as a coercive tool motivates the affected parties and others watching to build alternatives to reduce their dependence on a system that can be turned against them. And here is the self-reinforcing part. Each alternative that gets built lowers the cost for the next party of reducing their own dependence, because the infrastructure now exists, the precedent is set, the switching cost has fallen. So each step, each new alternative, each further reduction in dependence makes the next step easier and more likely, and the loop accelerates, and this loop is, I believe, already spinning, already past the point where a single decision could reverse it, because the alternatives are being built and their existence is lowering the cost of further defection, and the momentum is self-sustaining. The second loop is the fiscal one, and it is self-reinforcing in the most direct and mechanical way. More debt requires more interest payments, and higher interest payments contribute to larger deficits, and larger deficits require more debt issuance, which at prevailing rates requires still more interest payments, and the loop compounds. This is a feedback loop in the most literal sense, and it is already running, and reversing it would require a degree of fiscal adjustment that is, for the reasons I've discussed elsewhere, politically almost impossible to achieve, which means the loop runs on its momentum compounding past the point where any politically achievable decision reverses it. And the third loop is the reserve diversification loop, in which central banks observing that dollar reserves can be frozen by political decision, diversify into alternatives, and each central bank's diversification makes the next ones more normal, more expected, less costly in terms of the signal it sends, so that the herd, once it begins to turn, turns more easily, each step normalizing the next. These three loops, the de-dollarization loop and the fiscal loop and the reserve diversification loop, are all, I believe, self-reinforcing, all already in motion, and all past the threshold where a single decision could reverse them, and their combined momentum is what I mean when I say that the erosion of the privilege is already in motion, running under its own power, no longer dependent on future decisions to sustain it. The way capital actually moves as these self-reinforcing loops run their course, where it flows and why, and what happens to those who waited for a reversal that momentum had foreclosed versus those who read the momentum correctly and repositioned early, is worth understanding in its specific mechanics rather than in vague outline. And there is a framework that traces exactly this, called the dragon pivot. Despite the name, it is not really about any single country. It is about how monetary transitions unfold across history, how the self-reinforcing dynamics run once they pass their threshold, and how those who read the momentum accurately position themselves before the loops completed their course. You can reach it through the code shown on the screen or through the link in the description for anyone who wants the fuller picture. And that picture matters here precisely because reading the momentum correctly, distinguishing the loops that are already running from the problems still awaiting a decision, is the whole of the practical challenge. Now I want to return to the crucial hedge, the thing that keeps this honest, because it would be easy to slide from what I am saying into the overclaiming I want to avoid, and the distinction is everything. The direction is sealed, but the timing and the form are not. Let me be very precise about this, because it is where the doom narrative goes wrong. The momentum of the loops determines the direction that the privilege erodes. And this direction is, I believe, already effectively locked in past the point of reversal. But the momentum does not determine the timing, how fast the erosion proceeds, how many years or decades it takes, and it does not determine the form, whether the erosion is smooth or punctuated, and the form will, I believe, be gradual rather than catastrophic. A slow reduction in the dollar's share of global reserves and trade settlement and privilege, not a sudden collapse. Reserve currency transitions are slow because the network effects and the momentum of established trust are powerful, and the dollar's genuine remaining strengths, the depth of American markets, the real economic and technological capacity, the absence of a ready full alternative, all of these slow the timing considerably, even though they do not reverse the direction. So when I say the fate is sealed, I mean the direction, and only the direction. The erosion of the privilege is the determined outcome. When it fully arrives, and how fast, and in what precise form, all of that remains open, and much of it depends on exactly the strengths that will slow the timing without changing the destination. And this distinction between the sealed direction and the open timing is precisely what makes the correct response neither panic nor complacency, but calm, deliberate, early preparation. Because if the direction is sealed, but the timing is uncertain, then the rational thing is to reposition on your own timeline calmly in advance, rather than either panicking as though the collapse were imminent, which it is not, or waiting for a reversal, which the momentum has foreclosed. You have time because the timing is slow, but you do not have the option of a reversal because the direction is set. And so the intelligent response is to use the time you have to prepare deliberately for the direction that is determined. And what that preparation means in practice is the diversification of your position away from concentration in the eroding privileges currency and toward genuine productive assets whose value does not depend on the continuation of that privilege, and towards stores of value independent of any single system, so that you are positioned for the determined direction well before the uncertain timing arrives. The work of building a position out of genuine productive capability and stores of value independent of any single monetary arrangement, rather than remaining concentrated in the currency whose privilege is on a determined path of erosion, is worth doing systematically and calmly and in advance. And there is a framework devoted precisely to that called the sovereign vault. It is concerned with building durable, generationally significant wealth grounded in real productive assets and real institutional protection, the kind of position that is prepared for the determined direction rather than dependent on a reversal that momentum has foreclosed, rather than in the concentration that mistakes the slowness of the timing for the openness of the direction. It is linked below, and the code on the screen will take you straight to it for anyone who wants to go deeper on the question of how to position for a direction that is sealed while the timing is still open. And that is the practical heart of it, because reading the momentum correctly means little if you remain out of the comfortable belief that the future is still open, concentrated in exactly the position the determined direction would counsel against. Now, I want to turn to what I think is the deepest part of all of this, the meta insight beneath the specific analysis. And it is about a particular illusion that keeps people from responding to determined outcomes. And it is genuinely important because it operates far beyond the dollar. The illusion is the illusion of the open future. People have a deep and comfortable tendency to imagine that the future is open, that outcomes still depend on decisions not yet made, that whatever problems exist can be reversed by the right choice. And this illusion is comforting because it preserves the sense that nothing is yet determined, that everything can still be fixed, that no direction is truly sealed. And so, confronted with a process that is in fact already in motion, running under its own momentum past the point of reversal, people default to imagining it as still open, still awaiting a decision, still fixable, and they wait and they hope, and they say, if only the fiscal situation were brought under control, if only the reforms were made, if only the right decisions were taken, the erosion would be reversed and the privilege restored. And this illusion of the open future, this insistence on treating a determined process as though it were still open, is precisely what keeps them from repositioning, because they keep waiting for a reversal that the momentum has already foreclosed. And by the time they recognize that the reversal is not coming, that the direction was determined all along, the timing has run its course, and they are caught unprepared, having waited for an open future that was in fact already closed. And I want to think about why the dollar's erosion in particular is so easily misclassified as an open process still awaiting rescue, because understanding the specific misclassification is the defense against it. The first reason is that the privilege has been so stable for so long, for nearly 80 years, that people assume it will remain stable, that its very persistence is evidence of its permanence, when in fact its persistence has been increasingly a matter of momentum and inertia rather than of continually renewed justification. The second reason is that people trust that if problems arise, decisions will be made to fix them, that the openness of the future and the competence of the institutions will produce the reversal. And this trust in an eventual rescue is exactly the illusion of the open future applied to the specific case. The belief that the erosion is a problem awaiting a decision rather than a process running under its own momentum. And the third reason, the deepest, is that accepting the determined direction is uncomfortable, because it requires abandoning the comfortable belief that the future is open and that everything can still be fixed, and requires instead the harder acknowledgement that some directions are sealed and that the only remaining choice is how to prepare for them. And this acknowledgement is precisely the discomfort that the illusion of the open future exists to spare people, which is why the illusion is so persistent and so difficult to dislodge. I want to be very clear about what I am not saying because the misreadings of this are dangerous and I want to foreclose them completely. Cannot survive what is already in motion is a claim about direction, not about doom. I am not saying the dollar will collapse, and I'm not saying the collapse is imminent, and I'm not saying the form will be catastrophic. The dollar will survive. Its continued use will persist. Its genuine strengths are real and will slow the timing considerably. What is sealed is the direction of the erosion of the specific privilege, and only the direction, while the timing remains slow and uncertain, and the form remains gradual. And this is not a conspiracy, and it is not a secret plan, because the loops I have described are visible and public and running in the open, driven by the rational responses of many actors rather than by any coordinated design. And above all, this is not a counsel of panic, because a sealed direction with a slow and uncertain timing counsels exactly the opposite of panic. It counsels calm, deliberate, early preparation, the unhurried repositioning of someone who has time to prepare for a direction they have correctly read as determined. So I want to end, as I always do, not with an exhortation, but with an invitation to see clearly, because this is, in the end, one of the oldest patterns there is in the reading of the future, and it is not new. Processes already in motion have always been misread as still open by the people who wished them so, and every privilege ever eroded by self-reinforcing forces was defended to the end by people waiting for a reversal that the momentum had already foreclosed, insisting that the future was open and the outcome still depended on a decision, right up until the determined direction completed its course. This is not new. What is new is only the specific circumstance, the particular self-reinforcing loops now running around the dollar's privilege, the de-dollarization and the fiscal compounding and the reserve diversification, all in motion, all past their thresholds, and the particular illusion of the open future that keeps so many people waiting for a rescue that the momentum has foreclosed. What is already in motion cannot be stopped by wishing the future open. That is the thing I most want to leave you with. The direction is set by forces already running under their own momentum, and no amount of imagining that the outcome still depends on a decision not yet made will reverse a self-reinforcing process that has passed its threshold. But the timing is yours to prepare for, slow and uncertain, and giving you the time to reposition calmly and deliberately if you will only read the momentum correctly and stop waiting for a reversal that is not coming. And the value of that clear reading, of distinguishing the sealed direction from the open timing, invisible for a long time the way these things always are, through the long, slow stretch in which the erosion proceeds gradually, and the person who read the momentum appears merely an unfashionable pessimist waiting for something that has not yet visibly arrived, reveals itself the way these determined processes always reveal themselves, which is slowly, through the gradual running of the loops that those trusting in the open future never quite believe are real. And then suddenly, at the moment, the momentum that was building all along finally carries a transition into its rapid phase, and the direction that was sealed from the start becomes undeniable to everyone. And the people who read the momentum correctly and prepared calmly while the timing was still slow are found to have been, all along, simply the ones who understood the difference between what was still open and what was already in motion.